Hi everyone. My name is Trinity Juarez, and I'm an independent artist and member of the Surface Design Association Exhibition Committee. SDA is a membership nonprofit focused on contemporary fiber and textile art. And I'm happy to welcome you to this week's Textile Talk, How to Storing, Shipping, and Exhibiting Fiber Art with Lydia C. and Amanda Holden. Textile Talks webinars are brought to you by the International Quilt Museum, Quilt Alliance, Studio Art Quilt Associates, and Surface Design Association. And here are just a few housekeeping reminders. This is a webinar, so your screens and mics are not active or showing. We welcome questions, which we'll answer at the end of all the artist presentations. Please submit them in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. We're honored to bring you free and inspiring textile talks, programming, and we respectfully ask you to be courteous as you engage with the speakers, moderators, and other participants. Your chat comments can be seen by everyone. And please use the Q&A for questions, chat box for greeting others, and survey for commentary or ways we can improve. And if you prefer not to see notifications from the chat, you can click on the chat button to toggle them on or off. And I'm very happy to introduce our speakers and give an overview of this presentation for today. So this presentation will allow you to dive into the details of how to best store, pack, ship, and exhibit textile and fiber-based work with an eye towards preservation. Curator and Gallery Director Lydia C. and Textile Conservator Amanda Holden will present on a range of methods from industry standards to innovative DIY ideas. Regardless of where you are in your artistic career, this talk will provide valuable insight on how you can keep your work safe and exhibition ready for years to come. So today our presenters are Lydia C., who is a multi-platform artist, educator, and curator of art and archives, who is a firm believer in the transformative power of art for collective liberation. And we also have Amanda Holden, who is the Senior Conservator of Textiles at the Indianapolis Museum of Art at Newfields, where she has worked for over 2 decades.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to start us off today, and excuse me while I get my screen up. We all know that this is the fun part. Here we go. Okay, excellent. So I'm so excited to be here with you today. I am an artist, curator, and an educator, and I think that some of the topics that we're going to be discussing are often gatekept or presented in a way that can be really difficult to access, particularly in the wide spectrum of what's available to independent artists, as well as folks who are mid-career or late career and working with museums with bigger budgets. And so what I often come back to is that whatever we do, whether it is in the studio, making our art, getting ready to exhibit, to storing, to shipping, that everything that we do has to be functional, reversible, and stable. And those three ideas are going to take us through, that are going to be the thread, the through line of how I'm going to talk to you all about these methods today. And I'm going to start with the good enough side of the good enough to best practices, because I primarily work with emerging artists and students at this point in my career. And I myself, I would say I'm a emerging mid-career person. We often don't have the budget of larger museums, and so we do DIY methods that are good enough. We often teach our students that within that wide spectrum, you can have any number of perfectly suitable methods to use, as long as you're protecting your artwork and as long as what you're doing is either like invisible or conceptually relevant to the work itself. And so what you see here is a beautiful installation that a student of mine did, Fatima Absar. And on the right side, I've shown that the hardware methodology that she used was a steel cable and a turnbuckle. And I think it's really important to use the correct hardware words when I'm working with students and artists as well, because often you'll see an installation, and I'm guilty of like looking behind artwork whenever possible. Say, how is that on the wall? So throughout, I'll try to give you all the how the things got there. So the idea, making in the studio, packing work to ship, installing for an exhibition, and storing long term, is that artists must practice a variety of methods to ensure their artwork is safe throughout all stages. And so I'll give us the good enough, and then by the time we get to Mandy, she will give us the best cream of the crop practices. One of the things about things being functional, reversible, and stable is that we want all of those stages to be able to be handled the same regardless of who's handling them. So we want the function of the preparation to hang, the storage itself, and how the artwork is getting to the gallery or the museum or whatever, all to be pretty intuitive, no matter who's using it. We want instructions to be included, and here we have artist Eric Charlton shipped a small piece that also had a large palette that we had to source ourselves. So he gave us a beautiful printed direction with the neon sign itself. He packed up all of his hardware. It was all really clearly explained. And then in the directions, he said, and then I want you to go out and source a palette for me. And he gave us a kind of a feeling visual description of the palette that he wanted. And there will be a picture of that later in the presentation. We want everything to be reversible from the storage and shipping of it, but also anything that you add to the piece for hanging should be able to be reversed. And with a caveat there, sometimes your fixtures are built into the pieces, but generally speaking, especially with fiber art, hand stitching or adding some sort of element for hanging is great, as long as for the long-term storage, it can be removed and completely reversed because of this, for the safety of the textiles. And we also want things to be stable, not just stable for shipping, that you don't want them to move while they're shipping, but also stable for exhibition over time. Especially with fiber work, it has a tendency to relax or slump a little bit on the wall. And so anything that you're doing, you want to test in your studio over time and recognize that not every, especially independent nonprofit galleries, university galleries, are not as temperature controlled or humidity controlled as some museums can be. So when we think about showing our work in the long term, I like to approach that conversation in the studio with myself or with studio mates or in critiques from when I'm building the art itself. And so this piece was actually in the future tense show that I was in when I was just finishing grad school. And I learned to weld specifically so I could build these brackets. I really wanted these pieces to be sitting 16, 18 inches off the wall, because when the light hit them, they projected, it's a mesh signage material, and they projected a really beautiful cross-hatched perforated texture on the wall. And so controlling the distance that the works were hung away from the wall, but also not wanting to have anything distracting coming down from the ceiling, I talked through, this is what I want the piece to feel like. How do I achieve that with sculptor friends? And they said, buddy, you got to learn to weld. At this time, I was in grad school, so I was able to do that. So I fabricated, this was my first welding project. I fabricated these steel armatures that hold the pieces out. And then when I sent the piece to the Future Tense show, I included very specific directions because the armature had to be installed quite taut to hold the grommets of the piece, and a variation of a half an inch made it slump. And so I had to explain, I'm not going to give you a template because by the time it gets to you, you might need to stretch it a little bit further, but this is what it should feel like when you install it. And then when I shipped it, all the instructions were in the box. It was able to be packed back up, shipped back to me. And that box is actually still intact in my storage unit with the armature and with the quilt itself all packed up together and labeled. So if I were to want to send that piece out to another show, everything that I need for display is wrapped up in there. And it's a plastic textile, but the quilt itself is wrapped in acid-free and ethafoam so that it is separate from the steel of the armature. So here's some other custom mounts. On the left is a custom quilt mount that was done for a show at the Arizona History Museum here by artist and museum professional Eli Blasco. And he fabricated these quilt mounts out of MDF with a really nice low profile. The show was the Migrant Quilt Project, and the quilts are incredibly detailed, but also the subject matter of the quilts is very emotionally heavy. And so they wanted the displays to be completely neutral and recede into the wall. They painted the exact same color white as the wall. This is a situation in which a ready-made curtain rod would not do. And while that is appropriate for some quilts and sometimes when you're in a budget, uh, having access to somebody that can fabricate you a quick MDF thing really quick would be ideal because then you can paint it to match the wall. There's also ways to do 3D printed versions of this, and many libraries now have access to 3D printers. And on our resource document that we'll share links to, there's a video about 3D printing museum brackets as well. And then on the right here is a cleat that Ruben Moreno, who is an artist and museum professional as well, made for my students. And he calls it a ghost cleat. So he made it out of clear acrylic. So you can see all of the dimensions and the way that the cleat is put together. So when you're hanging a piece on the wall, a cleat can offer you just a little bit of a kiss away from the wall. But especially with textile works, you want to be conscious of maybe the slope of the bottom of the work. And so here he has the cleat mounted in the middle, but for a flexible piece of textile, you might want a cleat up at the top and then a bumper down at the bottom. And that's where Velcro comes in really handy as well. So we've thought about planning the work for exhibition, but how do we get the work to exhibition? So you want to use clean, easily repackable materials. That goes into that reversible thing, right? We want to be able to open the box, do our condition report as we are looking through your box, itemize everything that's in there, including the way that it is packed, so that we can then reverse it and pack it back to you exactly in the same condition that we got it. We photograph everything as we're unpacking it as well. Ethafoam is really handy for that. Styrofoam sheeting, bubble wrap, as archival as possible. If especially you'll be using the box for long-term storage, like I've done with my work, you want to make sure that all of the materials you're using are clean from the beginning. A lot of artists will reuse packaging, which is fine. And look, art handling has an immense environmental impact. So anytime you can reuse things, that's great. Just make sure that there's no errant tape tabs sticking out that could harm your artwork, and that it's clean and hasn't been used for any organic materials. You want to provide clear instructions, bonus points for labeling each component. You want to use, I like to use painter's tape, blue tape, rather than packing tape, specifically because it's easier to see and it's less dangerous for artwork. I've had the experience where I open a box, I go to move a piece of artwork and the packing tape sticks out and snags something. Um, and I love to use courtesy tabs as well. So when you just fold a little flag at the end of your tape, so it's really easy to remove. And you also want to make sure nothing moves. It's so simple, but once your box is packed up before you tape it, and use packing tape on the outside of the box. I didn't mean to say painter's tape on the outside. You do want to use packing tape or paper packing tape. But you close it up and just make sure it doesn't move. And if you shake it and shake it vigorously and anything's moving around in there, you want to go back in and reinforce it because the movement of the objects inside is not only unsafe for the objects, but any amount of extra air in there, if it's jostled in a shipping truck, you can get punctures in the box just because there's extra air in there. So here's a great example. Artist Catherine Reinhardt sent this box to a show that we did called Delivery Systems that I'll have images of here in a minute. And I really love the method here. She had layered part of the artwork itself was foam. So she had layered part of the artwork with wrapped up other aspects of the artwork and then lined the entire box in this pink foam material. You can buy sheets of this. It comes in different colors based on the density and where you buy it. And it's has a terrible environmental impact, but is extremely handy. This is a great example of a material that you would use, for you could use it again and again, like you would keep the box and use it for shipping multiple times, but you wouldn't want to store long term. So here's delivery systems, and you can see the piece that Catherine shipped to us in the lower left corner there. Delivery systems was a show where we invited artists who had artworks that really needed a specific installation process to be spelled out to the art handlers. And I invited artists to submit work that had to be shipped. They had to be based more than 100 miles outside of Tucson, which is where I am right now, so that they had to ship their artwork for my students to open. They couldn't hand deliver it. And all of the artworks had to have specific installation instructions. So we didn't install anything that was just on a wire, right? And in this view on the right here, you can see all the shipping boxes that came in with the artwork, as well as the instructions that came with the pieces of artwork. And then we also wanted to make sure, and I'm so happy to see a lot of galleries and museums doing this now, making sure that all of the collaborators on the show were on the gallery text wall. So we have the artists that we worked with, we have the media crew of students that we worked with, curatorial crew, preparatory crew, our co-curators, and then all of our preparatory collaborators. This is where the ghost cleat that Ruben made was part of this show. And we just wanted to make sure that the invisibility of art handling and preparatory work and exhibition design was made visible, not just for the students who are in the learning process, both artists and art historians, but also for the general public to understand what goes into making a show. And here's some other views. We had a whole wall that had preparatory materials stuck to the wall. And here's a close-up of Catherine's piece, as well as in the back, you can see Eric Charlton's neon piece. It's not illuminated in this picture, and the palette that we sourced for him in front as well. So here's a few random tools that I love that I didn't know about when I first started making mounts and packing work and things like that, that once I discovered made my life a whole lot easier. This 3M 415 tape is a very sticky double-sided tape that can be used to make book cradles that I have images of in a minute. Anytime you're using a like a archival material that you're folding around something to make like a book cradle like this, it's a really great material. The Ethifoam knife makes packing so much easier if you're using Ethifoam. I had no idea, and I had been using X-Actos to do this for a very long time. It is incredible. We have links to both of these and other archival materials in the resource document. And then here is a picture of a student, Claire Blanchette, mapping an installation. And what she did here is you can actually see she's using a laser level set to plumb. Plumb is up and down, and level is left and right, horizontal, to find the exact location to scale of the elements of this installation. She mapped it all out to scale and then unpacked it from the ceiling and packed it all in a box so she could send it to a show. And the person, excuse me, the person installing her work could open up the box and use this exact template to install the work in the ceiling. So it's all mapped out entirely to scale. Here's a situation where I was working on a show where we received weavings from Merlot-Cottoni from a variety of different collectors and museums, and all of them had different mounts on the back. And so we wanted to build a standardized mount where we could slide the support in and out easily. Whereas you see this piece that we got from a collector here, they had screwed the hardware directly into the canvas on the back of the piece. And one of the things that bothered me about this is that once you put it up on the wall, the hardware was coming into contact with the weaving. And so we devised, using Tyvek and folding it in a variety of different ways, devised a standardized mount that we could use for a variety of different sizes of weavings, because Marlowe, his weavings are mostly similar in size, but not standardized at all. And they also have different edges and stuff. And so we wanted to make sure we were hiding the mount, but also that it wasn't coming into contact with any hardware. But again, it had to be reversible because we had to get consent from all the collectors to attach the mount that we were using and then immediately remove it when we were done with the show and return the work. And so this is us just figuring out our dimensions and how we want to do it using Tyvek. And here's a Tyvek book cradle, and we used that 3M tape that I talked about before to create this beautiful, this was Dana Hemingway doing a demo for my students, and I really love the pin tuck area of this book cradle. She actually did this like in 10 minutes in front of my students, so it was super impressive. But just to get that little tuck in to look nice and tight, she used the 3M tape around the edge. Um, so, all these methods are in that spectrum of like good enough. And as you, maybe many of you are further enough along in your careers where you're working directly with museums and you have a bigger budget, or the museums are handling things for you, which is such a gift. And if you're at the point in your career where you're still building some of these skills or these relationships, you can find many ways to make super professional displays and mounts and shipping decisions that will protect your work over time, but you can always ask. And I think one of the scary things for especially students is not knowing something. You apply to a juried show, you get into it, and then you go, oh no, I have to ship my work for the first time and I don't know how to do it. You can develop works that are appropriate to your practice over time by learning yourself. You can also communicate with exhibitions professionals with whom you work and clearly say, I actually don't know what I'm doing. That's okay. Most professionals will try to help if they can, especially with juried shows that are catered to emerging and mid-career artists. They're used to people not totally knowing what they're doing. And one of the great experiences that I had when we did the delivery system show is I got to see such a beautiful variety of approaches that taught me a lot about how artists find solutions. Here's Diana Jean Puglisi's beautiful template system, and you can see the beautiful packing system that she did as well. Gatekeeping and exclusion in arts and culture has created barriers for so many people. So we want to be part of the solution by sharing resources freely and without judgment, rather than being part of the problem. So if you are an emerging mid-career artist, feel free to ask people that you know for help. If you are a mid-career or late career artist and you know an emerging artist, offer support, offer shipping help. And if you're somebody in the museum and gallery industry, recognize that not everybody gets the training in art school that we should. And often professional practices like shipping and display are not taught in even graduate programs. So all of us working together and doing programs like this that are free and accessible is a great way to build community. Feel free to reach out, and there's a resource document. Mandy's going to talk about a lot of museum level stuff, and all of the stuff that we're talking about is on this document, but also feel free to reach out if you want to talk about this further. And I'm going to pass it off to Mandy now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lydia. That was great. All right, let's see if I can share. Okay. All right. Well, my name is Mandy, and I am going to talk about the museum side of things. Let me see, why is this not advancing? There we go. I wanted to start just to introduce the museum that I work at. I work at the Indianapolis Museum of Art at Newfields, which is an encyclopedic art museum. And with just shy of about 200,000 square feet of gallery space, we are on the list of the top 10 largest museums in the United States. We have a 152-acre campus that houses gardens and 2 historic homes. The collection in the museum has about 42,000 artworks, and the second largest collection is the textile and fashion collection with just over 8,500 pieces. At its core, art conservation, which is what I do, combines art history, studio art, science, and people to preserve cultural heritage, primarily through examination, documentation, treatment, and prevention. And I highlighted the word prevention here because today that's really what I'm going to focus on how to prevent damage when traveling, exhibiting, and storing textiles. I also want to mention that at the top of this slide, you'll see there's a white box that says Find a Professional. This is a really great resource for the American Institute for Conservation, which is our ethical governing body for conservation. If you have questions or want to work with a conservator, you can click that button and you can narrow your search to specific materials and specific regions that you want to work in. My favorite aspect of conservation is that no 2 days are the same. One day will find me documenting a 17th century tapestry for an upcoming treatment, and the next will find me analyzing the composition of a milky deposit on a plastic dress from the 1980s. I work very closely with our conservation scientist at the museum. We have a multi-million-dollar lab that is capable of analyzing the smallest samples from artworks to determine how materials will age and break down in the future, and what we can do today to slow that degradation down. This knowledge extends beyond the composition of artworks and includes the composition of materials used in packing, storing, and exhibiting artworks. I thought I would start with an example of how we document the packing of an artwork for exhibition at another museum. I also want to say that my goal today is to really focus and highlight the decision-making process, because no two textiles are displayed or packed in the exact same way. This is one of the most glamorous pieces in the collection. It's a Chanel suit from 1973 that shimmers with all of its metallic threads, ribbons, and a few sequins. The V&A asked to borrow this piece for their 2023 exhibition, Gabrielle Chanel Fashion Manifesto. So to prepare this garment for shipping, a separate box and custom interior padding was created for every single component of this single ensemble. I'm going to focus on the packing of the jacket only and why we made the decisions that we did. So this is the cover sheet that is about to introduce all the documentation that was created. And this is what is shared with the borrowing institution. We'll look at a few of these images in closer detail in a minute, but I wanted to show what a packing guide will look like for any given artwork in the museum. It's a step-by-step guide on how to prepare the artwork for packing, and every sequential step on how to pack the box. As someone who is frequently on the receiving side of these instructions, I can say that clear and detailed instructions are most appreciated by the person receiving the artwork. As I mentioned, I wanted to highlight a couple of decisions and discuss why they were made. First, each of these beautiful buttons was wrapped in soft abaca tissue because I didn't want the buttons to rub against the beautiful fabric and possibly abrade it. So where did that come from? That came from the fact that I had a crossbody bag that I was wearing, and when I took my bag off, the strap had abraded my shirt, and there was pilling on the shirt. And so just from experience of how things move against each other, I didn't want that to ever happen again. So that's why I decided to really immobilize anything that could possibly rub against one another. This was a similar treatment at the pocket, just a barrier so that the fabric wouldn't rub against each other. And so I didn't want to pad the jacket or the box out with anything hard that could stab or puncture or mark the textile. So I used soft custom inserts. And so we padded the jacket out by creating inserts out of polyester batting with no resin, which were covered with Tyvek. Test Fabrics is a great company for ordering batting of different thicknesses, and they have batting that has no resin. So the resin that I'm referring to is often in batting for quilts, and it's an important thing because it is a fire retardant. And so most batting will have it so that it's safe for home use, but that resin isn't necessarily something we would want in artworks or touching artworks. You will also, like Lydia, hear me say reversible and stable a lot, and it's not considered a stable material. So if you can find batting with no resin, that's great. Tyvek is a non-woven fabric that you will soon see is used quite a lot throughout the museum. Tyvek can be sewn with a sewing machine, washed in the washing machine on cold, and line dried. The more it's washed, the softer it gets. When using Tyvek, you will notice that there are two very different sides. One is smoother than the other, and this is the side we often put against the artwork for travel. We line the bottom of the box with an archival blue board and twill tape straps. That way we can pull the jacket straight out and up out of the box. We don't have to put our hands underneath the artwork to try to grab it and pull it up. After placing the artwork on top of the board in the box, we place two triangles of ethafoam covered in Tyvek at the top corners, again to keep the jacket from sliding side to side during transit. I'll also say archival is a word you'll hear conservators use frequently, and it indicates that a material is chemically stable and can be safely used for preservation purposes. Finally, here's an example of how you can secure art for travel with tissue paper if resources are limited. When any artwork leaves the museum building, we wrap the box in thick plastic called visqueen and then tape every single seam with packing tape. We do this to prevent condensation from forming on an artwork, which occurs when warm, moist air comes into contact with a cooler surface, causing the water vapor to cool and condense on the surface into droplets. It's bad enough when this happens to my glasses this time of year, and I certainly don't want to tempt any textile damage, whether that be dye bleed or mold growth with unnecessary moisture. Each individual box is then placed inside a custom-built crate, which includes additional insulation and padding. The interior of the crate is built so the boxes are not resting on top of each other, but instead rest on shelves. Every crate and every crate interior is different and custom built to fit each artwork. With this, I also want to mention that museums generally try to reuse everything that they possibly can, but eventually we do dispose of crates and some of the other materials I'm going to discuss today. So if you have a need for the crate, you might reach out to your local museum and see if you can be put on a list as somebody who might be interested in taking the crates when we dispose of them. I will mention to keep in mind that for us at least, a crate purge happens only about every 5 to 10 years. So you might be on the list for a little while, but it is definitely something worth looking into. I'm now going to shift into mounting and exhibiting. For exhibiting textiles, I'm going to talk about 3 different mounting methods that I really enjoy using. When it comes to great resources for how to mount, pack, and care for textiles, it is hard to beat the Canadian Conservation Institute notes. CCI notes are available online, and it's a very generous resource from the CCI. And one of my favorite resources here is their PDF guide on displaying textiles with a Velcro mount. This is a screen grab of the first half of the instructions. It's very detailed and very clear. I will show a brief example, and if you're interested in this mounting method, I encourage you to visit this website. I thought I would show this Marie Webster quilt from the late 1920s as an example of how we use Velcro mounts in the museum. One of the most incredible things about the Velcro mounting system is the sheer strength of Velcro, which is the amount of strength required to slide the hook and loop side of the Velcro apart from one another in opposite directions. For the Velcro brand, the shear strength is 12 psi per square inch, which requires 12 pounds of strength for every square inch to separate those two sides, which is pretty remarkable when you start doing the math. So this quilt is 64 inches wide. We have 2 inches wide Velcro the entire length. So you take 64 times 2, and you start and times 12, and you realize like Velcro can hold a lot of weight. This is the Velcro loop or the soft side of the Velcro system. It comes in different sizes, but considering what I just said about the shear strength, we almost always use the 2-inch wide Velcro, which we machine sew around all of the Velcro edges to a cotton backing or twill tape that is cut slightly larger than the artwork and slightly larger than the Velcro. We then hand sew the cotton fabric on the back of the quilt, and the thread color matches the color that's found on the front of the artwork. This mounting method is completely reversible by simply cutting every stitch and removing the threads with tweezers. This is the front of the same area, and as you can see, it's really difficult to see the sewing threads. And just to prove that it is indeed the same area, I thought I would turn one of the corners over. So the Velcro hook, which is pictured at the top on the wooden board, that's the rough side of the Velcro system. And we staple that to a wooden board, and then that wooden board is attached to the wall with screws. Once the board with the Velcro hook is leveled and secured to the wall, we can then bring the artwork with the Velcro loop on the back to the wall and attach the system to one another. In addition to the sheer strength of Velcro, my other favorite thing about this mounting method is its flexibility and forgiving nature. If the quilt is curling in on itself, especially along the bottom corners, this mounting method allows us to disengage part of the Velcro mount and reposition the artwork so it hangs evenly. So we can raise a corner a little bit, we could lower another corner. It's just got a lot of built-in flexibility. I'll also say this was kind of a clever tip that the team here came up with. To help make those boards less visible, we started mitering the corner backwards, so you didn't see that right angle of a board, and that really helped reduce the visibility of the mounting system. This was actually another piece that we had prepared for shipping, and I just wanted to show an example of how we covered the artwork in Tyvek, and then everything gets labeled, the mount on the lower picture, and then the storage materials in the upper picture. There was a question early on about how we keep dust off of the textiles while on display, and I recommend vacuuming with gentle suction. I use a vacuum that has a variable suction speed, like the one on the left, that can be controlled with a simple plus or minus. I vacuum textiles on the lowest setting, and I also prefer using micro vacuum attachments, which are pictured on the right. These are gentler and allow for more control when I vacuum. I'm now going to talk about a second mounting method for flat textiles, which is a pin mount. The pin mount system starts with a strainer on which we pin the artwork. The strainer is the name we use in our museum, but I'm sure you'll hear different names for similar mounting methods elsewhere. We prefer covering these strainers with laundered ultra suede because the suede texture adds a bit of grip to help gently hold the artwork in place. And you could imagine that something with a grip is going to be easier for us than something that's really slippery. Behind that ultra suede is a layer of 2-inch deep ethifoam that will receive the pins. This is another example of museums trying to reuse materials that you can probably tell because this is an asymmetrical boards in the back. So we cut down a larger strainer so that we could use it for a subsequent exhibition. And then I just wanted to show that the profile is fairly thin. The ultra suede is wrapped to the back of the strainer and secured in place with stainless steel staples. And we use those because they don't rust. This is a William Morris textile, is actually one I just pinned on Monday and we just put up in the galleries. And so it's currently on display at the IMA. So we brought in the strainer. In this case, we used tan ultra suede and placed it on the work table. And then I oriented the textile so there would be an even border of ultra suede all around it. And then to pin the textile to the strainer, we use entomological pins, which you can see that I'm holding here on, again, another piece of ethifoam. These are stainless steel, and we can actually paint the heads of the pins with acrylic paint to better match the textile. But in my experience, the unpainted heads often disappear in most colors. So on the top, you can see some of the painted pin heads, and on the bottom are kind of that creamy brown is the natural color. These are just a few of the pins laying next to the artwork, so you can see how thin they are. And on the left, I've inserted a few pins partially so that you could see where they were. And then on the right, I've fully inserted the pins into the mount. And you can see they're nearly impossible to see. I highlighted 2 of the pins, but I'd say there's probably closer to at least 15 pins in there, which are pretty hard to find. Even when you see it in person, they're pretty hard to find. This is the piece after mounting, and the image on the right is it actually installed in the gallery behind plexiglass. I want to take a minute to recognize that to adhere to the time limit, I have not been putting the artworks and exhibitions into full context and discussing the curatorial thesis of each exhibition and artwork. But this information is all available on the Newfields website, as are many of the images that I'm sharing today. So this image I wanted to share is an example of Velcro mounts. And we wanted to really show the nature of the textile, how it drapes and undulates. And so that's why we chose a Velcro mount for these pieces. So this view has Velcro mounts on the right and pin mounts straight ahead on the left. The pin mounts are really great if you want a very flat display, and it really facilitates viewing complicated patterns. Here you can see pin mounts and one Velcro mount. With this display image, I wanted to mention that there was a question earlier about using UV inhibitors on textiles, which is something I do not recommend because this is not a reversible thing. Instead, I would recommend putting UV films on your windows to help limit the ultraviolet radiation that enters your space. I do think it's important to mention, however, that if you have a dye that's prone to fading with ultraviolet radiation, it is probably also going to fade with visible light, just because of the nature of ultraviolet radiation and its next door neighbors to visible light on the electromagnetic spectrum. So it is very good to eliminate ultraviolet radiation, but know that visible light is also very damaging to many dyes. The third option for mounting textiles is a 3D mount that was designed to be an exhibition mount, a storage mount, and a potential travel mount if needed. We are also all about functionality here and how to work smart. And so this mount could function in 3 ways. This decision was also made because the net that goes over the wearer's face is extremely brittle. So we wanted to minimize the handling. Some hats were displayed on head forms, and others were displayed on an invisible mount where the hats appeared afloat. To achieve this, we used fast shape. Fast shape feels like soft felt. Then when it's heated with steam to about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, it shrinks, melts, and becomes hard. It can then be cut with scissors, or if heated to be hard enough, carved with a scalpel. So after tracing each hat, this is exactly what we did to follow the contours of each headpiece. So the mount appeared invisible. These mounts then transitioned into storage mounts. Here is an image of the hats in storage. The artwork was attached to the fast-shape mount with Velcro. You're seeing a recurring theme with a lot of these materials, I think. A small piece of the soft Velcro loop was sewn inside the hat, and the rough Velcro hook was sewn to the fast-shape mount. The mount maker then created the metal rod on which the fast-shape mount was attached. Here you can see a shelf in storage of Besben hats, and you really can't see the fast shape. But if you look underneath, you can see the underside of the hats and the white fast shape mounts that follow the contour of each hat. I wanted to conclude by showing a few images of art storage. Storage in a museum is essentially a sea of gray and white. All artwork is covered to protect it, often with Tyvek. I know there was a question as well about storing quilts. Ideally, we would store everything flat, but that's not realistic because of space concerns. So if a textile is in stable condition, we will roll it and store it rolled, as you can see here. If you're folding a quilt, then I recommend inserting tissue rolls into every single fold. And so here on the right, you can see some tissue folds that should be inside these poor little pants. And we do this to avoid sharp creases in the fabric that can eventually wear down and break, as you see happen with this garment. This is something in our we use this for educational purposes and when we train for art handling these little pants. So it's a great example of why and how you should use padding. If you are folding a large quilt, I also suggest that every time you get it out and enjoy it, that you fold it in an entirely new way. And this again is to avoid creases forming along the same line. Finally, I want to conclude by mentioning that much like the CCI notes, another great resource for general preservation guidelines is the National Park Service conservograms. When we store artworks, we are really focused on preventive conservation, as I mentioned earlier, which includes protecting art from many of the things listed on the NPS Agents of Deterioration page. And much of these things are also going to apply to storage of art and textiles in your home and in storage units. And with that, I just want to say thank you for joining today. Thank you, Lydia and the Surface Design Association. And also thank you to all my colleagues. I work with the best and most creative problem solvers you could imagine. And so everything you saw today was definitely a team effort.
Thank you so much, both of you, for your presentations. This is such helpful information for so many artists. And now we have some time for some audience questions. So, Darcy asks to Lydia, where would you begin to find someone to manufacture a hanging device?
So I saw in the chat several people mentioned local maker spaces and tech schools. Excellent. There are a lot of artists who are also skilled fabricators. So if you have been to art school, it's always great to reach out, especially to sculptors, and say, like I learned to weld because I went to somebody and I said, and I saw somebody called this in too in the chat. Thank you for note. Like I know what I want the work to feel like, but I didn't know the technical term for what I needed to do with the steel. I didn't even really know that I needed to use steel. I didn't know what kind of a weld I needed. And so I spoke with a few different sculptors, and I'm also married to a sculptor. So sometimes I say, I don't know what the word is, but this is the feeling. And I was able to get them to translate the sculptural terminology of what I wanted to do. Maker spaces are great for that. Tradespeople are great for that. I feel like everybody has an uncle or a neighbor who's an excellent woodworker, but they would never tell you that. But you see them out puttering in their garage. Get to know your neighbors, especially elders. They might not consider themselves artists. They might consider themselves fabricators or tradespeople, but they would be able to help you make a thing. And again, if you don't know what MDF is, or if you don't know what the material is, you can try to work with somebody that you can explain that to. A lot of communities do have maker spaces, and there's a lot of really amazing 3D technology at libraries now. I think I mentioned that. So even going to your local library, they might even know someone in the neighborhood or in the community. Yeah, I think that's great. Make friends, be generous with your resources as well.
Thank you. Someone else asks if this question could be answered by either of you. If someone could talk about sending textile work for biennales, especially related to declaration for customs, duties, and taxes and insurance.
I will say I am fortunate that we have an entire department dedicated to that, and it's not my department. So I probably couldn't speak well to that topic. It is a very complicated issue.
I went to a Western Museums Association conference maybe 9 months ago here in Tucson. There was a whole panel on shipping nationally and internationally. And again, like Mandy said, it's a really deep subject. It's really difficult for independent artists. Insurance and shipping large objects is really complicated. And particularly with what is going on with our relationships internationally right now, it's getting increasingly more complicated. Again, I'm going to lean back on relationships. A lot of university museums have really generous staffs who are who have education built into their philosophy or the mission of the museum. You can never go wrong asking for help. You're not going to get a reputation for being difficult by asking for help. You're going to get a reputation for being difficult if you do a bad job of shipping, of delivering, of being late because you're worried or scared about getting your work somewhere. So, and I think I saw somebody in the chat ask about stuff like, not in the question, but like, how do you get support from museums if you're shipping a complicated object? Or maybe that was in the question thing too.
Mm.
You have to ask, because a lot of galleries and museums will assume if you are submitting work to a show that you are at a professional level in your career, that you're capable of doing that. But as we all know, we're all coming to this from a variety of different experience levels and also financial means. And it's extremely expensive. So asking for help and being open and communicative with the professionals that are in your network is the best way to build relationships and get the support you need. But also, sorry, we can't tell you how to ship things internet, because again, it's so case by case.
Thank you. Valerie asks, if they ship a quilt to a museum or gallery, will they deal with any wrinkles created from shipping?
Do you want to take it first?
Again, galleries and museums are going to be very different.
Yeah.
For us, especially working with living artists, you have to explicitly give us permission to do anything.
Yeah.
Some people are more apt to just do it without asking. I do condition reports. I ask everybody. I also won't even, if somebody sends me something and they don't explicitly explain how it should be hung, I will ask, like, can I hang this from the ceiling? Can I hang it on the wall? Like, how do we want to do that? So if it shows up with wrinkles, I'm gonna reach out to you and say, can I get these wrinkles out before I would touch it?
Yeah, we're the same way. We would need written permission, and at the very least, it sort of goes along lines. Everything we do is reversible, and removing creases through steaming is something that is not reversible. And so it sounds kind of silly, but it's actually really hard to do it right, to do all the testing of the dyes to make sure we're not going to cause dye bleed. So yes, museums will do it, but we'll be asked to sign off on everything before we do it. So there's very clear communication.
Yeah, and actually this relates to one of the questions that we got ahead of time about sending work to be on view with your own hanging system, and sometimes it doesn't go as planned. I think the person who asked that was Alice. Explaining everything within an inch of its life is the only way to get what you need done, and it has to be foolproof. It has to be tested in your studio. You should photograph the entire process, just like the packing photos that Mandy showed us, or the delivery systems instructions that Eric sent. And Diana as well had a really beautiful template that kind of had everything drawn out in there. Having explicit consent and explaining what it should look and feel like to be taught when you apply to the show. Waiting until you have been invited to be in the show and then saying, oh, by the way, I have my own hanging system, creates this difficult feedback loop for like, I'm the curator. I'm also the only preparator, exhibition designer, and installer. So if all of a sudden I get a message that I have 3 extra things to hang from my 13-foot ceiling than I thought before, I need extra time to do that labor with steel cable and crimped ferrules and all of that, which is very different than hanging something with a cleat or a drywall screw on the wall. So when you apply to juried shows saying, I have my own hanging system, in the detail images, even if it's an image cap, you can only submit up to 5 images, you should have an image of your hanging system and explain it, and then say, there's not enough room to write this. I'm going to send you an email explaining my hanging system. We would rather know way ahead of time than afterwards.
Thank you. There were a couple quilt-related questions, which included where to purchase quilt packing materials. What is a source to find archival tissue for packing quilts? And what kind of material is used to roll a quilt around for storage?
I think we have, and Lydia really took the lead on this, so I want to give you full credit. There's a really great resource document that we created with lots of websites and links to archival materials, tissues, archival rolls, boxes. Um, it's a multi-page document, and it includes a lot of the links mentioned today, the artists discussed. And so it's probably easiest to look through that. Because I think it's a pretty impressive list that we pulled together. So
And you can always email. Again, university
Mhm.
museums are great resources. Hey, I'm a local quilt artist, and somebody mentioned on a panel I was on, and I'm looking on the Talus website, and I can't tell the
Yeah.
difference between Tyvek and vellum. That's a
Mhm.
pretty quick email, and if it's especially a teaching space, they are usually pretty generous, as long as you don't catch them right in the middle of an exhibition install.
Yeah.
Sahara asks, what is a good mount for textiles that are viewed from the front and back that are loosely woven or knitted? Can a screen work?
Hmm. Anything can work. I think that's the best. That's my favorite thing about my job is just really doing this creative problem solving. So I wouldn't rule anything out. Everything's on the table to begin with, whether it's a screen or a clamp or you're securing it to something. I mean, that's the kind of the fun part, especially if you're thinking about how you're going to mount an exhibit as you're creating your piece, and that's built into the process. That can be really fun. But it's also fun if you bring pieces to a museum, to kind of creatively solve how would you mount this. But I guess I'm kind of dancing around the answer because every piece is different and depending on the materials and the weight, I could see easily a dozen different directions.
Yeah, loose weave and knit is particularly complex because the heavier
Mhm.
the top of it will start to stretch out. Um, that was kind of my solution with the standoff steel, was close enough to that so you could still poke your little head behind it. And really, it was far enough away from the wall that you could slide behind it if you wanted to. But it still kept it protected. And sometimes ceiling hanging is not possible depending on the gallery
Mhm.
space. And that's also something really important to talk to your gallerist, your curator, your museum professional about ahead of time. If you want it to be seen from both sides, or if you want light behind it, if it's not possible to hang from the ceiling, what would an option be? Do you do it in a corner where you have it across,
Mhm.
4 points of contact? A screen is a really interesting idea. Also, to secure a lightweight weave or knit with a transparent interfacing or a gauze or a
Mhm.
acid-free tulle, and then suspending from the backing fabric rather than the artwork object itself, and then lighting it really interestingly. Yeah.
That sounds very conservation friendly. That would be what we would probably do is do some
Reverse it.
invisible sheer fabric to support it. I mean, you could also get really complicated and have, a plexi box with, clear plexi rods that go through to help support the weight every so often. I mean, it really is just the really fun part of, like Lydia was saying too, like, what do you want your piece to feel like? Can it be sandwiched? Does it need to breathe? Do you want it to move? And all of that will help inform the mount making.
Yeah. And not a
Mhm.
textile, but if anybody's ever been to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, my favorite museum in the world. I love it so much. In the room from which the paintings were heisted, there are a few pieces in that room that are double-sided paintings, and they have them in a beautiful kind of custom furniture mount that looks like the rest of the furniture in the room that Isabella, I think, commissioned to show both sides of the painting. So it is, again, the mount should be either completely invisible or conceptually related to the work
Mhm.
itself and totally reversible. Just a few, just, it's real easy. Just whip it up.
Thank
Oh,
you
we're at
guys.
time.
Yes,
Right.
unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you both so much for all of the information and for answering questions. Thank you to everyone else for posing your questions. Please check all the resources that have been mentioned today. Thank you to our sponsors, and this recording will be available on YouTube and the SDA website in the next week. And next Wednesday, Textile Talks hosts a presentation by Ai Kajima, which is sponsored by the International Quilt Museum. So thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.